Thanks, Sophie.
Welcome to Beyond the Bio. It is great to have you on the show. I wanted you to come on the show because I'd seen your story. I'd seen the challenges that you have faced over the last year. And it was a combination of being really, admiring how you've come through a really challenging time, but also linking it to the topic of Beyond the Bio, very much around how you are now using the personal brand that you have built up over years to now move forward and do something really positive and really exciting. And I know you've got some super cool plans to get going in 2025. But for anyone that is listening to the show who hasn't come across you before, can you tell us, and I know it's a long story in terms of what's happened, but just to give a bit of context as to what I'm on about in terms of what you've experienced over the last year.
Yeah, I don't mind sharing with the listeners that you and I were just chatting before we hit record, and I think my biggest challenge this year to date is going to be trying to give a concise answer to some of these questions. So my name's Ellie McKay. I first got into business in 2018. I launched a property development business with my soon-to-be ex-husband, and a big part of what we had to do as part of that company was to raise finance, to build our profile, to go out there and do networking and almost become a key person of influence, which is obviously something that you're really passionate about. I'm really into marketing, and I remember one of my first mentors said to me, it's not about what you know, it's not about who you know, it's who knows you, because the more people who know who you are in whatever sector you happen to be in, the more opportunities you are creating for them to do business with you. And it really is that simple. And at the time, I got a lot of guidance around how to use LinkedIn specifically. I'd never really heard of LinkedIn, and my limited knowledge of it at that time was that it was just basically an online CV for people that were looking for jobs. But the platform's evolved a lot, even in the time since I've been using it, since 2018. And really that's when I first started to build a personal brand. I didn't necessarily know I was building a personal brand. And how it came about really was because in 2018, just starting out in business, I didn't have any property projects to shout about, but I was trying to build that authority. And I thought, well, I don't want to be disingenuous. We've not actually done any property deals yet. This is a brand new business. So what can I talk about with authority? So I just started sharing things that I found were relevant to me at that time, like the challenges around launching a new business, like trying to be a present mum when you've got 3 young children. My youngest was he was just under 12 months at the time of starting the business. My middle child, Isabella, she was 2. There's only 12 months, 13 months between them. And Sienna was 4 at the time. So these were the kind of things I was battling with. I was talking about postnatal depression, talking about facing the fear and doing it anyway, lacking in confidence, sharing the vulnerabilities. I remember sharing my first video and then a story behind it, this 90-second video, which was probably pretty crappy. But I actually shared in the text with it that it'd taken me best part of a day to record this video.
And that was on LinkedIn?
Yeah, because I hated how
video
I
would have
looked.
been really amazing then for LinkedIn.
Yeah, but you know what? It was that vulnerability, I think, that authenticity that people were just, they gravitated towards that. And I started to build a following really quickly. And yeah, it sort of just went from a few hundred to a few thousand to tens of thousands. And it just kind of spiraled from there. That was my introduction, if you like, to building a personal brand. Now, during COVID, as everybody was, I was stuck in the house and I started to feel like I was losing a little bit of that identity. I was enjoying being around the kids all the time. Well, most of the time. But there was definitely moments where, I don't know, I could feel myself slipping. I used to get such a kick out of being in the room, being at these in-person events, talking on stages at this point, being the person at the front of the room, being in masterminds. I did start to struggle a little bit, and it's going to sound a little bit woo-woo, but I was actually doing a meditation during COVID when it came to me to start. It wasn't a podcast at the time, but it was a series of Facebook Live interviews, which I named the Sunday series, which was basically me on a Sunday night with a glass of wine, interviewing somebody from, whatever sector, somebody with an interesting story to tell, and we just put the world to rights. And every week, you weren't talking tens of thousands, but you might have 100 people on the live, and then the next week you might have like 150, and it just kept growing and growing. But of course, the thing with a Facebook Live is afterwards people can then watch it, and then by the end of the 10 weeks, because I did 10 interviews, they were receiving thousands of views. Some of them were receiving tens of thousands of views. And this might sound really silly, but that was the first time in my life that I'd really got the one-to-many concept. Because up until that point, I used to travel across the country, always at my own expense, to London, Manchester, wherever, to do keynotes, never for a fee, just to build that brand, to build that authority, usually talking about mindset, because I was never that operational in the sort of day-to-day running of the property business, but I used to sort of share the journey with people. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, I'm literally just here in my kitchen on a Sunday night, no train fares, no leaving my family, no having to get childcare for my young children. And I've got thousands of people rather than 30, 50, 70 people listening to what I've got to say. And to be honest, that was a bit of a game changer. So long story long, just to sort of close that down, what happened after the 10 weeks, the world started to open up again, and I was at a pivotal crossroads, and that was the moment that I decided to launch the podcast, launch the On a Mission podcast, not really having any sort of strategy or plan behind it, but so many people had just said that they felt I had a talent for interviewing people that I felt like it was something that I needed to expand upon. And very quickly it grew. And
how quick was that? Because obviously that podcast became really big. And how, at what point did you start it and start to see that traction?
So I started it back end of 2020, and I got to number one in the charts for the first time December 2023.
Wow.
So it wasn't that quick, but 3 years from a standing start.
And that's number one, what, in the business chart?
Number one in the business chart, and I think we also got to number one in the entrepreneurs chart as well with Apple. And then it all came crashing down, Sophie. It all came crashing down. We were literally at the top of our career. We just interviewed Stephen Bartlett. We had sponsorship deals. I had a flight booked to go to Dubai for multiple meetings with people who wanted to do brand collaborations and back the On a Mission concept. And literally one phone call changed the entire trajectory of my life.
Tell us a bit about that. You can't leave us there. Cliffhanger.
Leave you hanging. I know. I'm just like, how do you condense this one? Okay. So the short version was, I referenced earlier my ex-husband. So my ex-husband, partner of 20 years, was also my business partner. We had started the property development business together in 2018. I was with our other business partner as well. I was very active for the first few years, not in terms of the refurbs and the developments, but certainly in terms of the marketing and other areas of the business. As I'd started to focus on my own brand and different things, I definitely didn't have the same grip on what was going on within the business. However, outwardly, everything seemed to be extremely successful. So much so that my family and I were meant to be moving to Dubai. Yeah. We'd been out there looking at properties. We'd been out there looking at schools. We had our own family home on the market. This was absolutely happening. We told our friends, we told our family. We had the date set. The kids were enrolled. They were due to start. They'd met their teachers. And it turns out that the whole thing was not only built on a pack of cards, really, house of cards, but I'd basically been lied to and deceived. There's no other way of saying it. The business was liquidated in April 2024, owing millions of pounds. The family home got repossessed. The cars got repossessed. My daughter got pulled out of school. My dad lost his life savings and everything just came crashing down literally within one phone call. I very stupidly and very naively had never detached my podcast from the property business. There's reasons behind that. I now sort of realise that the revenue that was coming from the podcast was actually propping up the property business. But again, you know, full ownership, that was my responsibility. That's something that, you know, I should have handled very, very differently. So the outcome of that was that I had to pull my podcast down. I came off of social media. I didn't feel it was appropriate to be on social media at all. I was dealing with massive trauma. Came off of LinkedIn with over 100,000 followers. Came off of YouTube with videos that had millions of views. Came off of Facebook. I had to walk away from the business community that I built up, which was all around elevate to success, which for obvious reasons didn't really sit very well. Yeah, and that was it really. I felt like I had lost all my commercial value. At the point of getting this phone call, there was no money for payroll. The bank accounts had been wiped out, and I was literally in a situation where I couldn't feed the children. And when I was looking at what skills, what value I've got to offer the world, I mean, my confidence was at an all-time low. But I thought, well, I've got no social media. I've got no podcast. I have no value. And after I got out of the trauma mode, which obviously lasted for quite a few months, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need to make sure you've got accommodation and the basic needs of your children met first and foremost. You've got food, you've got income, you're able to absolutely, you know, provide for them. Also then dealing with a breakup of a 20-year relationship on top of everything else, and trying to ensure my dad's not homeless, amongst many, many other things. It just felt like we were getting grenades thrown at us every single day. Well, we were getting grenades thrown at us every single day. But to bring it full circle, it was actually that personal brand that has saved me on so many levels, emotionally, spiritually, and financially as well, because I managed to keep my Instagram. I came off it, I deactivated that account for 6 or 7 months. I'm now back on Instagram, which was always my worst performing platform, but it still had about 30,000 followers. So, it's not to be sniffed at. But in terms of where the podcast was at previously, it was a sort of drop in the ocean, but it was a starting point to rebuild.
And what made you choose Instagram over the other platforms if that was the worst performing?
Well, so LinkedIn, if I'm honest, I'd set up initially to build a brand for podcasting. Because my role as the marketing director was to get investment, it was to raise finance, it was to build the company's profile. Even though I'd transitioned to talking about my podcast for the last couple of years, there was a big chunk of those 100,000 followers knew me for property. And, I didn't want that. It didn't feel like that was an appropriate platform for me to be on. Now, I would have burned them all to the ground at that point, but I don't mind admitting it's probably a little bit of ego here. Like, I've got some really well-connected people that follow me on Instagram. I do have the likes of your Stephen Bartlett's and many other sort of A-list celebs on there that I've got a relationship with. Quite a few of them I've got a personal connection with as well. So I felt for that reason, actually Instagram is definitely the best platform that I'm aware of for building relationships within the podcasting space, connecting with guests connecting with me. And that's your social proof as well. And lots of good video clips and things like that already on there that can showcase what I can do, what I'm capable of, the level of conversations that I've had in the past. And even though we were starting from scratch, that's still, you can't erase your future and your previous achievements.
You're glad now that you archived it rather than deleted it, and that you have
massively
been able to go back and do that. I mean, was there like a key moment, like a light bulb moment where you wanted to turn that back on and you had some clarity around where you go to next? Or was it a gradual thing of coming out of the trauma mode and moving into self-preservation and what next?
You know what, Soph? I used to have this in my old office before it got, repossessed. A big sign on the wall. we haven't come this far to only come this far. There is absolutely no fucking way that I went through all of that trauma to just walk away. There's just been there's been too many learnings this year to not share that with people. And actually, you and I spoke about this when we went for brunch. You can't take away someone's mindset. You can't take away their knowledge. I've got the blueprint. I know, relationships are the highest form of currency. I've got the network. I know what it takes to get a podcast to number one. And actually, to me, it's quite an exciting prospect, building it from scratch. I mean, I didn't need to burn it to the ground, but it was associated with a business that I don't want any part of. I think whatever I do moving forward now, it's got to be me and only me. And I think any women in particular, without sort of stereotyping, or anyone maybe who's been through divorce or been screwed over financially, will understand. I know it's something that you can relate to as well, that it's like an empowering part of the process, reclaiming that ownership. And just taking it to the next level. And not just to the next level. This is going to be significantly bigger than the previous podcast. I've got absolutely no qualms whatsoever that I will be the number one female podcaster in the UK.
I love that certainty and the fact that, you've done so well with it in the past, but you've now got all this learning and all these great, strong reflections and just a clear path as to how you're going to do it. And, we were talking earlier about some of the plans that you've got for next year, and it just sounds so exciting. And I'm optimistic that this time next year you're going to be sat here going, bloody did it. Here I am. And how exciting is that you're doing it on your terms now? It's so cool.
Yeah, you know what though? It's so many people used to say this to me and I never really grasped the importance of it until this year. But your personal brand is your own intellectual property. No one can take that off you. And thankfully, my brand was no longer associated with one particular thing. And even now, it's interesting because I was speaking to my podcast manager about this because I've just started sharing a bit more, I want to say thought leadership, but motivational insights, I suppose. Certainly not projecting myself as a business guru at this point, but sharing a lot of the things that have helped to get me through this around resilience, around mindset, and people are going nuts for it. I noticed when I was sort of tracking some of the data with how many views I was getting on my stories and things, anything that I was sharing that was a bit more personal and motivational was getting significantly higher numbers. So, what that tells me is the personal brand, even over the podcast brand or a company brand, if you can build that, you can then turn that to absolutely anything.
That is exciting. That is good. So you said that you had some great relationships with people that you'd built up and that's been really pivotal in terms of the next steps and where you go from here. How have you used those relationships? What have you said to people to make the most of those? I repeat, relationships to me, and I've said this for years, they are the highest form of currency. So thankfully, I'd grasped that concept before this year. And so many of the high-profile guests, but it's not just about the high-profile guests, because some of the most meaningful and impactful conversations I've had are from people that have not really got much in the way of a personal brand, but they're successful in different areas in their life. But those people often become friends. I often use the example, I've had Joe Foster on, who was the founder of Reebok. He came on a couple of years ago, and then through that relationship, which we just did in Zoom, actually, he was living out in France at the time, we went out for lunch. We've now been out for lunch multiple times. We've met up on holiday. They've been to the house for lunch, and things like that you can't really quantify in terms of the value that you get from people and some of the conversations. To be able to have a personal connection with someone with that level of knowledge and wisdom and life experience, you would pay tens of thousands of pounds really to sit in the room and be able to pick the brains of someone of that caliber. And that's just one example. And obviously some podcast guests say it's just transactional. They come, they do a great interview, and then that's it, and then you don't hear from them again. But yeah, the vast majority of people I do have that connection with. And yeah, I think if you click with someone, then
you click, don't you? And a lot of those high profile guests are coming back on. They're showing me support in so many different ways. They're looking at different ways to collaborate with me through the next coming months and years to get me back on my feet. And I tell you something, it's quite often it's just, if you can stay in the game no matter what happens. I always said, well, I don't think it was me that said it. I think it was Winston Churchill, if you're going through hell, keep going. And another one of Winston Churchill's quotes, actually, which is really powerful, is success is bumbling from one failure to the next without any loss of enthusiasm. And there's been times this year where I've slowed down and I've almost been at a standstill, but I've never actually stood still. I have always managed to keep going, even if it's just tiny little baby steps, but it's keeping that momentum going. And also I think as well, I don't know how relevant this is to talking about the personal brand, but actually accepting help and support from people. That's probably been one of the biggest challenges as someone who historically likes to be that person as opposed to actually receiving. But it was a good friend of mine had actually said, because anytime someone gives me something, I always look at ways that I can reciprocate. So they were trying to give me X, and I'm like, okay, well, perhaps I can do some like LinkedIn consultancy, or what can I do to... They said, Ellie, you're depriving us of the opportunity to be able to help and support you, and we want to do that, and that's going to make us feel really great about ourselves. And you're now trying to make this like some symbiotic like skills exchange. Please let us just
because that's
help.
what you've been used to. So now it's that shift to actually accepting that support at a time when you need it. I think what's coming through really loud and clear is this whole mindset thing. So I can completely understand why people are after that in terms of content from you, because there's a lot of people that would have just crumbled with everything that's been thrown at you. So yeah, I can see that being a very clear direction for next year. So looking ahead to what's coming up, tell us all the cool stuff, or as much as you can, in terms of your future direction and how you're able to use your brand to make all these cool things happen.
Yeah, so I've got a few people that are looking to collaborate. So I can't say too much about that. You know, because I told you earlier, but we've not got it over the line yet. So I can't say too much. But everything basically stems from the podcast. At the moment, I'm doing bits of consultancy and things just to keep my head above water. From being registered as homeless, I've now got a nice little house for me, my 3 crazy children, and there are 2 crazy dogs, and things are looking really optimistic. But as the podcast continues to grow, that commercial value grows. So once we get to a certain number, then we're going to be looking for sponsorship opportunities, which... Yeah, we obviously had sponsors for the original podcast 2.0. We'll be looking for companies to come and back the vision. They'll be able to come in at a fraction of the cost and back us now and get locked in. So that's going to be a really great opportunity. We're then going to be looking at doing some membership sites. I feel like there's a lot more of a community feel to On a Mission 2.0. And actually the demographic of my listeners has changed quite a lot as well.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because I've shared. So to anyone who wants the full story, if you listen to the first episode of On a Mission 2.0, you will get to hear this story in its entirety. But what it has done is given permission for people to be vulnerable and to reach out. And the amount of stories that I've had from people now who've been through something similar, they've been on the receiving end, or they've been through their own version of trauma, because pretty much everyone has been through their own version of trauma. It's made me identify that there's a massive need really for that community. And the podcast is interactive. It's probably a bit more Joe Rogan style in the sense I'm trying to make it a lot more conversational this time around, as opposed to me just asking the guests a load of questions. It's more of a chat. But yes, I think we'll definitely look at a community element of that, whether that's Patreon or one of the other platforms. And when I get the podcast, and that's when, not if, back to the number 1 spot, I'm going to be doing a course on how to get a number 1 podcast. So it all comes under the On a Mission umbrella, because that's what I'm really passionate about. But it's interesting because we talk about the power of personal brand, whether that's, through social media, podcasting, whatever else. But I do just also want to mention it's something that, again, perhaps doesn't occur and it depends what your podcast is about. But it might not necessarily dawn on your listeners like how my podcast has been able to support me through this dark period, because yes, I mentioned the relationships that I've got with the guests, like that has been absolutely instrumental to my comeback. But it's also all the golden nuggets, all the insights, all the learnings. It's been like my university, and I've had the privilege of interviewing some of the top thought leaders in the world, and some of those stories around people that have been on the brink of suicide or have lost everything financially, or basically experienced traumas that are significantly worse than anything I've endured. It's given me context, it's given me motivation, perspective, gratitude.
All the things.
It has given me confidence. So there's just, there's so many different advantages to having a podcast, not just the monetization, and it continues to give me a gateway to access incredible people. So for anyone thinking of starting a podcast, we've all kind of been there as business owners, I'm sure, where you get that dreaded DM from somebody asking to pick your brains. And I do, and always have, given a lot of my time for free, but we also have to respect our own boundaries and also realise that we've probably paid tens of thousands of pounds to get that knowledge that this person wants to extract for the cost of a Thai latte or whatever, but what I have found is that when you approach people to come on a podcast, they're a lot more susceptible to that idea. So if there's someone that you want to access in your business world for whatever that may be, I'm sure they would be a lot more open if you had a podcast rather than you just wanted to sit them down, have a random Starbucks with them as well.
Totally. And on this show, we're always talking about the value of podcasting. And in fact, we had Jason Greystone on talking about that exact topic. So we're big fans of podcasting here. And I think that's a huge benefit, isn't it, in terms of building those relationships with people that you want to ask all those questions to, but them feeling like they're getting something back in terms of the profile piece of them being on the show. So that is great advice. Ellie, it's been brilliant talking to you. I am so excited for what is coming for the next year. You're just going to absolutely smash it, and I can't wait to celebrate with you when you do.
Oh, bless you. Thank you, Sophie. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.